a definition, which is a software testing. So what exactly a software testing is? It is the process of verifying, are we developing the right product or not, and validating whether the developed product is right or not. So here, as part of this software testing, you are doing certain things here. So software testing is a combination of verification plus validation. Verification means at the time of a development, if you are cross-checking whether we are developing the appropriate app or not, we call it as a verification. And validation means once after this development is completed, whatever the things we have developed, whether it is working as per the expectation or not, we treat it as a validation. So software testing is a combination of a verification and a validation. This verification, we can also call it as a static testing, and this validation, we call it as a dynamic testing. Okay, static testing and as well as a dynamic testing. That's it. Good enough. Any questions are here on this? What exactly is static and as well as a dynamic testing? Now, the next point here is this is static testing. It's saying that are we developing the right product or not? So at the time of a development, if you are cross-checking whether you are developing an appropriate product or not, we are just validating or verifying as part of this verification. Okay, good. If that's the case, then what we need to do here is, okay, this verification, a simple example is, recently I joined an organization and I need to send an email to my senior manager. So before sending an email, I will cross-check multiple times the content, whether I'm addressing the complete content or not, whether I'm dealing with all these things, whether I have covered everything or not. If I am cross-checking these things multiple times, we call that particular stuff as an verification. You use it to do this kind of a verification, right? So that's what we treat it as an verification. Okay, good. So in the real world, whenever you are working on the projects, it's mandatory for us to verify it. Okay, it's a mandatory for us to verify this particular thing. Good enough, done the deal. And then the next point that we need to consider here is this static testing will be categorized into reviews and as well as a walkthroughs. Review means examining or cross-checking, examining or cross-checking project related works. Whichever the project related works are there, if we are cross-checking that project related works, we call it as a review. And a walkthrough means once after we develop the application and assume that not exactly the developed application, assume that I'm on a project from 3 years and recently you joined the firm. So I will share knowledge to you. Whatever the knowledge I have on the project, if I'm sharing that knowledge with you, that particular thing, we call it as a walkthrough, or we can also call it as a knowledge transferring sessions. Okay, we call it as a knowledge transferring sessions, guys. Okay, good enough. So the point out over here is a walkthrough or a knowledge transfer sessions means if someone is having any idea on the product and if he is explaining more about that particular product, we call it as a review or a walkthrough. A walkthrough. Whereas a review comes under which examining or a cross-checking the project related work. Whatever the project related work is there, if you guys are cross-checking that project related work, we call it as a reviews. Then this review was again broadly categorized into multiple types. Depending on a project need, this review was categorized into multiple types. So what are all those types this review was categorized? So let us see. The first review is a code review. Assume that, okay, assume that I'm a developer and even you are a developer. Okay, assume that we both are developers. Surendra and Sweta, assume that they both are developers. Once after, okay, Surendra has prepared the code. If Ramya or some other developer is reviewing his code base, we call it as a code review. So I prepared my code, someone else in my team is reviewing that particular code base, which we call it as a code reviews. And a formal review. So what is a formal review? Formal review. If a review is conducted with a pre-plan and with a systematic procedure followed by proper documentation. If something is lagging, if you are documenting that particular thing, this whole process, we call it as a formal review. If your review is conducted with a pre-plan, there is a plan for that, and there is a systematic procedure for that. And if something is missing, we are doing a proper documentation. This whole chunk, we call it as a formal review. An example for this formal review is year-end financial audits. Usually we know every year at the end of a financial year, basically the audits will be conducted, and on these financial audits, so what it will happen means precisely they will review only few sets of documents itself, and if the document some content is missing, they will list out. So there is a pre-plan for that financial reviews. They will follow a systematic procedure one after another. And if something is missing, they will detailedly document it, which we call it as a formal review. And the next one is an informal review. If a review is conducted without a pre-plan and systematic procedure, okay, if there are nothing, basically if you are not following any plan, if you are not following any systematic procedure, if you are not following anything, we call it as an informal review. On a random basis we will review something and we will share our review over the verbally. Basically we will share our inputs to the folks verbally. There's a whole process, we call it as an informal review. Okay, the formal review and informal review are a quite opposite things. In a formal review, a detailed documentation and a systematic procedure and a proper plan will be there in a formal review, which will not be the case in an informal review, guys. Good. And then a code review, as I have mentioned, the code review means one developer will be reviewing your code base. And the next one is a technical reviews. So this kind of a technical reviews will be conducted within a team where the resources will discuss about the skill set or the tools, whatever they want to use for that particular projects. Okay. So whatever the tools they want to use for that particular project, they will discuss. Assume that the customer is having an automation requirement and they don't have what exactly the tool they need to use. So we will conduct a technical review, and in which we will specify, okay, we will conduct a review and we will specify, or we will discuss, if I use this particular tool, what is the advantage? If I use this particular tool, what exactly the advantages, limitations, all these things we will be discussing as part of this technical reviews. Good. Any questions on this? Of a review. Okay, the last type of a review which we have is a management review. So what is this management review? these reviews will be conducted by a higher level management to check whether the project is on track or not. Basically, assume that we will have some deliverables in a project. We have some deliverables to complete it by end of this month. Whether we are on a track in meeting those deliverables or not, we are going to verify as part of these reviews. Okay. So this point, we call it as an management reviews. So management reviews will play a crucial role. Those guys will be focusing on the complete project management and as well as a delivery activities. Okay, whether the project is up to the mark or not, how exactly we are dealing with it. Everything, if we are focusing on that, we treat it as an management reviews. These are all the various types of reviews which we have. Okay, the static testing will deal about a reviews plus walkthrough. Okay, the static testing will deal about a review and as well as a walkthrough. Whereas, let's see the validation, whether the developed product is right or not. Whatever the product, whatever the software application we have developed, whether the developed software application is right or wrong. Okay, once after this development is completed, if you are cross checking whether what we have done is right or wrong, we treat it as a validation. Okay, we treat it as a validation. Usually this validation will be conducted by the developers and as well as the testers. Both the developers and as well as the testers will do this validation. Okay, whatever the validation these developers are doing, we call it as a white box testing, and whatever the validation testers are doing, we call it as a black box testing. So let us see in detail about this white box testing and a black box testing with some examples as part of our sessions. So white box testing, testing conducted on the source code by the developers to ensure 100% code coverage. So if at all you are doing this round of a testing, okay, to verify whether they have a covered a complete code or not, this will be done by the developers on their source code. Whatever the code they have created, if they are verifying whether they have completed the complete coverage of that code or not, for a requirement whether they have completed or not, if they are cross-checking this whole thing, we call it as a white box testing. So who will be doing this white box testing? Developers are the resources who will be playing a crucial role on this white box testing. Okay, so this white box testing is a combination of unit testing and as well as an integration testing. The combination of a unit testing and as well as an integration testing, we call it as a white box testing. Okay, if you are doing a unit and as well as an integration, the whole chunk, we call it as a white box testing. Then immediately a quick question will rise in our mind. What is a unit testing and what exactly the integration testing is? Even we should know, na? So what is an unit testing and what exactly an integration testing? We should know basically. Unit testing means testing conducted on the smallest separatable portion of a code. So developer has written some code base. If you are doing a testing on a smallest separatable portion in a code, very small chunks of a code base, we call that particular testing as a unit testing. In an application, there are multiple units are there. If you conduct a testing on all those units, we call it as a unit testing. Perfect. Then the integration testing. So what exactly the integration testing is? If testing conducted on the complete integrated module, or once all the units were merged, and if we are testing it, we call it as an integration testing. So in the integration testing, you will be doing a round of testing on a complete integration. So individual modules, you will club it and we will see the data is transferring between the modules or not. If you are cross-checking that complete information, we call it as an integration testing. Okay, we call it as an integration testing. Perfect. Done the deal. Any questions for me on this, or you are good so far, guys? Unit testing and as well as an integration testing. Everyone?
Yeah, I'm good.
Deepa, Gayatri, Raj, any questions?
So, could you please explain again integration testing?
Yeah, sure. So one thing is basically you have a, see this one. Let me show you this website. So unit means if you consider this search functionality, this is a small portion. And if you consider the courses, it's a small portion. Corporate training, it's a small portion. Become a trainer as a small portion. There are a multiple small chunks are there here in the entire application. The code, with respect to the code, if you merge all the code into a single unit, the complete code will cover. And if you are verifying whether that particular code is working or not, the whole chunk of code is working or not, we call it as an integration testing. If you do the testing on a smallest separatable portions of a code, we call it as a unit testing. If you do a code verification or a coverage on a complete code base, we call it as an integration testing. Got it? This integration and a unit testing are related to the developers itself. Am I clear for you all?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, got
So
it.
this is all about a white box testing. Then what is a black box testing? Testing conducted on the application. So testing conducted on the software application by the testers to ensure 100% requirement coverage. If there is a requirement coverage, and if we as a testers are doing that particular coverage check. So it means customer asked us for a particular requirement, whether that requirement got a fulfilled or not. If you are doing that particular activity, we treat it as a black box testing. So where are we doing our black box testing? On a software application. See, examples for a software application is a Gmail, Yahoo Mail, Facebook. These are all the various kinds of a software applications. All these software applications you are accessing using their URLs, gmail.com, facebook.com, yahoo.com. These are the various URLs which you are accessing any kind of a software application. The ultimate point here is whenever a tester is conducting testing on any application, even they will be accessing the application using certain URLs defined for them in that organization. So in that particular project, they will give you a URL. So buddy, this is what your URL for this particular application. You need to test it. So you will test on that particular URL. So there are a different sets of URLs are there that we will study moving ahead. Not at this particular point, which we will study. Moving ahead itself, we are going to study that concept. Okay, but the ultimate point is we will be verifying these URLs itself. The application we are going to verify with the various URLs. That chunk we call it as a, okay, that chunk we call it as a black box testing. Okay, so the ultimate point is if you are testing the application with the various inputs, and verifying whether the customer requirements are got satisfied or not. The ultimate objective of our software black box testing is to check whether the customer requirements were met or not. If the customer requirements were met, then it's perfectly fine. If the customer requirements were not met, then it's not, a valid case where we will be logging down the various sets of issues in that situation. Okay, so but the ultimate point out over here is a black box testing means testing conducted on the application by the testers to ensure 100% requirement coverage. If there is a requirement and if you want to check whether the customer requirement got satisfied or not, we as a testers will do a black box testing. And on top of this, the black box testing, black box testing is a combination of system testing plus user acceptance testing. Okay, this black box testing is a combination of system testing and as well as an user acceptance testing. Okay, so what exactly the system means? Entire application. There's a whole application we treat it as a system, guys. Okay, this whole application we treat it as a system. If you are doing a round of a testing on that particular system, we call it as a system testing. Okay, we call that particular testing as a system testing, whereas a user acceptance testing, once we deliver the application to the customer, if customer is doing a round of a check from his end to see whether to accept the application or whether to reject that particular application, we call this a whole chunk as a user acceptance testing. This user acceptance testing will be conducted by customer, and this system testing will be conducted by our testers. Okay, we will be doing this one. And in some organizations, they will ask us to do user acceptance testing also. That falls under a different category, which we will see moving ahead. Not at this particular point, the user acceptance testing criteria and other things that we will see moving ahead, not at this particular point. Got it, guys? Any questions on this? Perfect. So then what is the system testing? As I told you that if we are testing entire application under test, whatever the components are there, if we are testing each and every component in the application and validating it, we call it as a system testing, and a user acceptance testing will be conducted by an end user. Gets done the deal. So this is all about the system testing and as well as an user acceptance testing. So guys, let me take a pause here for